We begin this World News programme in Thailand, where the government appears to be winning, at least in part, a struggle with protesters. The Prime Minister, Yingluck Shinawatra, has easily won a vote of confidence in Parliament. And yet thousands of protesters are still on the streets, some of them occupying government ministries. Although the situation hasn't spiralled out of control as it did in 2010, the government has deployed police, but crucially the army isn't involved in a big way, at least not yet. So let's talk to Florence Louis, live for us in Bangkok. Florence, you were at the government complex. This is where the main protest group camped out overnight. The protesters may have lost to the Prime Minister in Parliament, but on the streets they're still there. Are they in any way losing heart?
No, not at all, not from the looks of it. This is still a very raucous, lively protest. This is not the only place that's being occupied by protesters. They're still at the Finance Ministry, where they've been camped out since Monday night. This, however, is where the top protest leader, Mr. Suthep Thaugsuban, is. Now, there's an arrest warrant out for Mr. Suthep, but police have made no attempt to detain him, even though he's been leading marches on streets. Yesterday, he led protesters to the Department of Special Investigations, which is the top criminal investigative agency of the country, but there was no attempt to detain him. And that perhaps is an indication of just how keen authorities are to avoid any form of confrontation that could potentially turn violent, bearing in mind that the last time street protests were this big was back in 2010. Now, those protests ended after 3 months, but only when the government ordered the army to move in. There was a very bloody crackdown, a very violent end, and more than 90 people were killed. Now, Wayne Hay looks back at the 2010 protests.
Thailand's seemingly endless battle for political control appears to be reaching another peak. Protesters have seized government facilities and a major thoroughfare through Bangkok. They say the government is being run by former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, who lives in exile, avoiding jail for abusing his power. Among them, Anand Haisawan and his wife, who have been protesting for weeks.
I don't want the Shinawatra family to run this country anymore because they don't respect the law, but they expect the people to.
These are scenes that have been repeated time and time again in Thailand by people wearing different colours. In 2010, I witnessed a long, peaceful rally descend into street battles as soldiers moved in. The so-called red shirts were trying to remove the government at the time, a government that's now in opposition. Ultimately, their protest failed. 3 years ago, this is where the military operation began to try to get rid of the red shirt protesters from the streets after they had been in this area for almost a month. In the end, many people were killed here. As you can see now, it is heavily fortified because this is the back entrance to Government House. Since 2010, Thailand has been relatively quiet, but behind the scenes there's always been an acknowledgement that there will be one, perhaps final battle for control of this country. Watching the crisis and perhaps sometimes still advising is Panitan Watanayagon. As an acting spokesman, he became the government face during the red shirt uprising and is now a university lecturer. He believes there must be a new political system of accountability between the two major parties, without Thaksin and other leading figures from the old guard.
These two political parties need to move on from individual personalities and get really engaged with the people on the streets in a way that giving them answers. So next time they don't have to come out on the streets.
Despite the masses on the streets, the battle has always been between a handful of wealthy people about who has the power. At the moment, it belongs to the party of Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra, Thaksin's sister. So far, she's relying on the police to maintain security and hasn't called upon the army. But in Thailand, it's often difficult to tell whose side the politically active top brass in the military will be on. For now, this is a relatively peaceful situation, but history suggests that the longer it drags on, the greater the chance of confrontation. Wayne Hay, Al Jazeera, Bangkok.
So, Flora, where do those protesters that you've been talking to believe they can go from here?
Well, we've just spoken to the top protest leader, Mr. Suthep Thaugsuban. Now, he said that they are not going to back down. It's what he's been saying for the last few days. They will continue until they get their victory. The people want this government out, is what he's saying. It seems that they're trying to force the government's hand. Now, here at this government complex, one of the offices of the government complex, we've been told that 70% of the staff are on leave. There's no way that the government can continue to function if people don't come into the office and they continue to occupy the finance ministry. But what the government perhaps is hoping to do is to be able to ride this out and hoping that perhaps demonstration fatigue will set in. And the other thing that's probably going to go in the government's favour is the fact that the King's birthday is coming up next Thursday. He's a very highly revered figure, the monarch in Thailand. And people may clear the streets out of respect for the King. In fact, the Prime Minister in her press conference earlier today did refer to the fact that people shouldn't be protesting. The nation should be getting ready to celebrate the King's birthday.
Florence Louis, thank you very much indeed. Live there in Bangkok with protesters.